fasten your seatbelts. Turn up the sound. You are about to witness the last days of the F-4 Fighting Phantom before it flew off into the pages of American history as the most versatile multi-mission jet fighter. You'll meet the pilots and the ground crews that kept them flying, with cameras in the cockpit, the back seat, the travel pod, and the nose. You're about to take the ride of your life. We'll take you up to Mount Shasta, the Sierra, the Pacific Ocean, Mono Lake, and right down on the deck over Nevada's Black Rock Desert. Ride in the tanker while they refuel a formation of Phantoms and see how they did it from all the angles. You'll do a walk around with veteran pilot Rick Bandham as he shows the features of the F-4 and what a pilot looked for when he pre-flighted the aircraft. A story so compelling, so real, the filming of Phantom was investigated by the Air Force. So hold on tight, all you bears, whizzos, and EWOs, because no matter if you were a plane captain or the pilot, an airframe mechanic, or you worked on the flight line, it doesn't matter what color your shirt was on the flight deck, even if you worked on the assembly line. This is your story, because this was your airplane, the legend of America's most celebrated jet fighter, the story of the Phantom. Our story begins in 1953, when McDonnell Douglas first designed the airplane for the Navy. The early prototype had a straight wing and a stabilizer. It bore a striking resemblance to the A-4 Skyhawk line attack jet. It was designated the F-3H-G. There were no lift to the wingtips and no drooped horizontal stabilizer. The cockpit, it was single place. Over 1,000 of the original Phantoms were built for the Navy and were the first carrier-based jet fighters. That's why the redesigned Phantom was called the Phantom II. This second prototype had 2 cockpits, revised inlets, and a drooped tail. The wing was still flat, but that would be revised in the first prototype.
Now this is kind of the uniqueness of the F-4. We have a notch right here. We also have the wing bent up, and this is what we used to say about the F-4. They bent some up, they bent some down, they added some pieces, and they said, okay, it must fly now. But it's all part of the design. This helps the dihedral effect and to make the airplane much more stable in the various regimes of flight. And each little bend up, bend down notch, the notch particularly helps us in our high angle of attack. Gives us better airflow across the wing so we don't get early separation. We can control the wing.
And so it was on May 27, 1958. McDonnell Douglas rolled out the F-4H-1 Phantom for its maiden flight. It was to be piloted by their chief test pilot, Robert C. Little. Soon, high over St. Louis, the first of what eventually would be over 5,000 Phantoms took to the skies. The platform was designed to carry Sparrow air-to-air missiles. And when it came to bombs, the Phantom could lift and drop 22 500-pound bombs. That was 11,000 pounds of ordnance, plus fuel. Talk about thirsty. Whoa, those 2 J-79 GE engines consumed 2,500 gallons of JP4 fuel in just over an hour.
Afterburner is exactly like a blowtorch. It's probably never going to get recommended for the Fuel Saver Award for the year because we have a highly complex engine running through there, through the compressors and the turbines. We light the afterburner, we start pouring raw fuel into the tailpipe, lighting it off as a blowtorch, and we are not even able to read the fuel consumption in the cockpit, but they give us a rule of thumb that by lighting the afterburner, our fuel consumption goes up by 4 times, 4-fold, or a 400% increase in fuel consumption.
Wow.
If you took an airplane off exactly the way it's configured here with 17,000 pounds, took off, stayed low level and full afterburner, you'd have about 8 to 9 minutes worth of fuel.
That's it.
Before the airplane was bone dry. So we don't use it, we use it for takeoff and we use it when we fight.
Before the plane saw active duty service, it established a variety of class records. In a flight from Edwards Air Force Base in 1959, the prototype, codenamed Project Top Flight, soared to a new absolute altitude of 98,557 feet. Project High Jump established a whole series of time-to-climb altitude speed records. Sage Burner set a low-altitude speed record of over 900 miles per hour. 20 years later, that record still had not been broken. And Sky Burner, only the second F-4 prototype, set an absolute world speed record of over 1,600 miles per hour. The first Navy training squadron to fly the Phantom was VF-121 at NAS Miramar. But it wasn't long before the Air Force and the Marines were also flying the Phantom. Through rain-swollen skies over North Vietnam, F-4s out of Da Nang flew sortie after sortie against suspected enemy targets with 500-pound bomb loads. These aircraft came to be known as death rattlers. Out at sea on Yankee Station, crews on carriers such as the USS Kitty Hawk, Enterprise, Saratoga, and Constellation became indoctrinated as members of an elite naval fighting corps known as the Tonkin Gulf Yacht Club. The Air Force, they soon adopted their own use of the Phantom. They added a stick for the backseater. From Cam Ranh Bay to bases in Thailand, the Air Force flew thousands of missions, dropping more ordnance tonnage than was expended during the entire Second World War. The Air Force developed the camouflage brown and green paint scheme that marked their early models. The 8th Tactical Fighter Wing, the Wolfpack, operating out of Thailand, scored more combat victories in the air than any other Air Force squadron. Kill ratios in those early days of the F-4 program were dismal. Most pilots did return, but far too many did not.
We went into the war teaching guys long-range intercept tactics. They went in there and found themselves in knife fights with MiG-17s, and we had a horrendous loss rate early on in the war. And we had adapted a philosophy envisioning the way we felt the next war was going to be fought. It turned out that our enemy didn't agree. And the Navy went back and very much looked at, why are we running a 1-to-1 kill ratio? We have airplanes that are Mach 2, we're carrying the missiles, and we're having vintage 1950 airplanes shooting them down. Yeah. What is going wrong here? Yeah. They went back, evaluated, and they said that we have quit training our pilots in advanced combat maneuvering. Therefore, the Top Gun School was the first formed by the Navy down in Miramar, and it was to teach aerial combat maneuvering. And it's become very famous. That school there went back into the F-4, then advanced the handling characteristic, taught the pilots where they could fly this fantastic airplane, how they could use the vertical, how they could maneuver, how they could use their thrust to take advantage of the MiGs. The latter part of the war, particularly when we got into the aerial fighting that was going on in May, September, and December '72, and the kill ratio went overwhelmingly on our side. No matter what, we still have to keep in mind, this is a fighter, and we have to know how to fight a fighter.
Gotta let a pilot do what a pilot does, and that's fly.
Yes. Don't let them sit there and control electrons. Get them out there flying the airplane. And every time we've done that, we have achieved phenomenal success because our pilots, the American pilots, are the best trained pilots in the world. And they've always done that better than any other country, and that's been their answer. It's only when we've changed our philosophy of operating, and we kind of walked in with one hand tied behind our back, that proved to be a problem.
The F-4's service-wide popularity was so keen, it was the only platform in history to be flown simultaneously by the Air Force Thunderbirds and the Navy's Blue Angels. The Thunderbirds flew E models, while the Blues flew the J model. The Vietnam rocket sled served multiple roles as an air-to-air fighter, an escort, a bomber, an air-to-ground attack fighter, interceptor, air defense, air superiority, a wild weasel SAM hunter, and a photo reconnaissance ship. There were to be a myriad of different models from the original H prototype all the way through to the S model versions. McDonnell Douglas founder James S. McDonnell was pictured here with the 5,000th Phantom. The company went on to manufacture a total of 5,195 F-4s. During the height of manufacture, the company turned out 2 jet fighters every single day. From 1962, when it was first placed into active naval duty, until 1995, when the F-4 served the USA in its final theater of war during Desert Storm, the F-4 was indisputably history's most versatile, multi-mission jet fighter. In the early 70s, the F-4 was placed on duty with Air National Guard units across the country. One such unit, the Nevada Air National Guard, had distinguished itself by winning numerous NATO competitions for photo reconnaissance, beating out our own regular Air Force and the Navy for time and accuracy over a target. They were flying the RF-4C model Phantoms. It was early in fall when we were invited to document the final days of the F-4 at the Nevada Air National Guard. In 5 weeks, the Phantoms in this recon squadron would either be flown off to the boneyard or delivered to the Spanish Air Force. Either way, these were to be some of the very last F-4s in North America. The Nevada Air Guard gave us permission to mount our cameras to various pylons on the airframe. We took an old travel pod, cut a small hole in each end, and then mounted a small finger camera, looking both forward and aft. The recorders were placed inside the pod. Another great location was up in the huge nose compartment, where the photo recon cameras were normally mounted. These RF-4C models were ideally suited for photography, allowing us to shoot out both the port and starboard side looking windows. We also placed our cameras in the cockpit with the pilot and the weapons system officer in the rear seat. Now, while we were given access to mount our cameras, it was clearly understood that the Guard could not fly any special photo missions for our benefit. That was the bad news. The good news was that as each pilot took his last flight in the Phantom, he was allowed to choose where he would fly so we could coordinate our shooting locations. Some flew to the Pacific Ocean. Mount Shasta, a dormant volcanic mountain in Northern California, was another popular destination. Others chose to fly down the majestic rocky canyons of the Sierra Nevada. There were 2 additional sites where the Air Guard practiced their missions on a regular basis. Black Mountain sat high on the eastern Sierra Range overlooking Honey Lake. The second practice area, specifically designated for low-altitude flying, was an isolated site called Sand Pass. It was situated on the edge of Nevada's Black Rock Desert, just north of Pyramid Lake. Coordinating with each pilot, our crews would drive for several hours out into the desert or climb high mountain peaks to reach remote shooting sites in hopes of capturing their practice runs. Sometimes we got lucky, but more times than not, the only thing in the air didn't burn JP-4. Out on the Black Rock Desert, the ground was covered with tufa deposits, a needle-sharp mineral rock left over from when this area was the Great Lahontan Inland Sea. We suffered 14 flat tires, a blown engine, and a lost helicopter out of Sacramento that left us high and dry on the most important day of filming. Out in northern Nevada, you might see a car pass by every 4 or 5 hours. Not a great place to break down. Oh, the fun with this video never stopped. On our very first flight, we mounted a finger cam looking aft on the travel pod. Why, the airframe mechanic had assured us the gear door would close with a good 6 inches to spare. Watch what happened when we took off. Kiss that camera goodbye. For years, our camera crews had amassed considerable experience following low-flying aircraft at the Reno Air Races. Those were vintage World War II racers that seldom exceeded 525 miles an hour. But the Phantom was a twin-engine jet fighter. They flew much faster than a Mustang. They also had the potential to fly much lower. And as you're about to see, the closer they got, the harder it was to follow. It was the middle of the afternoon when pilot Jeff Turney and his weapons system officer Eric Bowering suited up for an early evening flight over the Sierra. In the Guard, it was not unusual for the weapons system officer to fly with a variety of different pilots. Each had their own duties and flight responsibility, so they did not usually fly together as a team. The wingman for this flight was Ted Wurzburger. His weapons system officer was Dave Snyder.
Noise!
The pilot's responsibility was to fly the airplane and monitor systems that directly related to the condition of the engines, avionics, and the attitude of the aircraft. That's why the pilot's job was to pre-flight the aircraft, checking key mechanical features and fluids that were critical to the safety and integrity of the Phantom's performance. Now, the weapons systems officer's job was the operation of the mission's special equipment, such as navigational aids and the photo reconnaissance cameras. Unlike some of today's more automated aircraft, the Phantom was intended to be a platform flown and controlled by a pilot. When the Navy originally accepted the Phantom, they had a choice of making it either a single place where the pilot did everything, or a two-place with a pilot plus a systems specialist in the rear seat. The concept of a multi-person crew was not foreign to bombers, warships, or tanks in the field. Those extra pair of eyes and skills is what contributed to the F-4 serving in so many roles and lasting almost 35 years in the U.S. arsenal. It was late in the afternoon when these two F-4s prepared to depart from the Reno-Tahoe International Airport. The crew chief supervised his crew, working in concert with the pilot. The headset he was wearing was tied into the aircraft's communications system so he could speak with the pilot. They brought their aircraft out onto the runway, where ground crews gave all systems a last chance check. In times of combat, out on the runway, away from personnel and stockpiled munitions, is where missiles and weaponry was armed before the aircraft launched. The two Phantoms proceeded to taxi into position for their launch. Reno-Tahoe had a 10,000-foot main active runway. At an elevation slightly over 4,400 feet, they'd need to use up almost half the distance before rotating the nose wheel off the ground. The flaps were down. Jeff and Ted unlocked the wheels, and away we went. They had filed a flight plan that would take them south of Reno, Nevada, over Washoe Valley, and down over Nevada's capital, Carson City. The temperature was 84 degrees. Winds were light and variable out of the west at 4 knots. It was a perfect afternoon to be flying. The two planes then flew south, lowering their altitude as they approached the headwaters of the Tuolumne River, high in the wilderness of the California Sierra. If you've ever flown the Phantom, you know how difficult it is to see directly forward and immediately under your nose without rolling up to look underneath. So you can imagine how hard it was for the wingman to stay directly above and behind his lead at close range and still maintain level flight for the cameras. As the flight progressed, we would see the camera ship roll or pitch up as the pilot lost visual contact with the lead through the canyons.
Primarily we use the wingman for in the combat role of the aircraft. And your wingman's there to provide you with extra weapons, extra bombs, extra eyes, in the reconnaissance sense, extra sensors. If I can run 2 sensors over a target, I have twice the chance that I will make sure that I have a successful mission. If we get a air-to-mud F-4 going out there, if he has a wingman that's loaded up with missiles or with bombs, then we can end up in the same sorties, deliver twice the ordnance on the target. Another very important factor from the fighter pilot perspective is he's up there in the air-to-air engagement. Lead is very often engaged, focusing out the front of the aircraft. The wingman's job is to guard lead 6 o'clock. Okay. And that's where the term check 6 is. You want the wingman checking your 6 because you're going to take him where he needs to go, but he's going to make sure you get there by checking your 6. Okay. And so formation is an integral part of any fighter pilot activity and is one of the traits that we look for early on is good formation skill. And we don't talk to the wingman. The wingman's job's to be there. We tell him where we need him, and if he's not there, he's going to hear about it when we get back on the ground.
The aircraft flew down the Tuolumne River Canyon into the setting sun, and then down the narrow canyon over the Hekhatchee Reservoir, north of Yosemite. It was September, and most of the snow had burned off the high country. Only a few patches remained on the north-facing slopes. We were flying over some of the most pristine alpine country in the western region. We would continue south to Mammoth Mountain and eventually fly the shoreline of California's Mono Lake.
Peace is a flower that grows in the sunshine. Its petals are raised to the sky. Love and understanding, oh why can't we have peace all the time? That hangs on the breeze.
The next morning, we arranged to have one of the Phantoms pulled up in front of the hangar so that Rick Vandam could tell us some of the things a pilot looked for when he pre-flighted the aircraft.
Rick, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Jim. How are you today?
I'm just great. I wonder if you could give me a little walk around this airplane and tell us some of the special parts about it, okay?
Jim, it'll be my pleasure, and we'll go over and we'll talk about this. A very important part of the airplane, make sure all the pieces are there before we get going.
Excellent.
So let's get started, Jim.
Excellent.
Rick Vandam had almost 5,000 hours logged as an F-4 pilot. No rookie, this guy. Rick first checked the manuals to make sure the aircraft was ready to fly. He then performed a quick safety check up in the cockpit. Then he took us down under the airplane where he talked about the nose gear.
Okay, we come down the strut looking for the integrity of it. This is our nose gear steering assembly system, and it actually electrically drives from, we activate it in the cockpit to give us good steering so we can maneuver the aircraft around here in tight quarters in a very safe manner so we don't have any problems with that. Okay, very similar to back up here. Anytime we have hinges in here, we would like them to move. And that freedom of movement tells us that we still have a real good connection there. Also check to make sure we do have this safety wire. If this comes loose here, we will end up having the nose gear drop and we will lose our steering.
Okay.
Cause some problem.
Is that like a shock absorber a little bit too when you land?
This, as we come back inbound, this here is the shock absorber right here. And this actually, when you see the airplane in flight just prior to touchdown, or just after takeoff, this will be extended the full length of this right here as this extends out, so the nose gear will actually extend out about this far. One of the unusual characteristics of the Air Force model F-4 versus the Navy model of the F-4. In the Navy airplanes, because of the demands of the carrier catapult launch system, when they come in and hook up to the bridle on the cat, they will actually, from the cockpit, inflate this strut. It will extend the nose up about, from our level here at about 10 inches, up to about here. That's very important for them to do because it's critical to getting the airplane off the deck of the carrier when it ends up with its ramp speed. That's one of the differences between the Air Force F-4s and the Navy F-4s. Exterior appearance is very similar, but we have subtle differences all the way through the airplane, showing why ours are a little better than theirs.
No bias there, right?
None whatsoever. Check down security of the tires. We need to have these tires checked, and we do, kind of unusual versus what you see on your automobile. We actually will go down to what you can see here is a little bit of the cord showing.
I was going to say, it looks like you're in great trouble there to be.
And now, these are actually multi-cord tires, and we will actually work down from cord to cord until, as you can see here, we're in white cord.
Yes.
It will go down through a certain number of layers until it gets to red cord. Red cord is time to change the tire.
And Rick, why are these screws important?
It's very important here. If you'll notice where all these access panels are, we might have these 50 screws in here, and it does appear that this panel will stay in quite nice with 49 of them. The problem lies in that if one of these screws leaves the airplane, this is why we have to make sure they're very tight. It leaves the airplane. If you look at the path right here, it will go right in the intake. The intake to the airplane, the first thing, and you're looking back in there, is you see the first stage of the stator and the compressor. This little metal screw will come in there, and that is actually a very sensitive motor spinning at about 11,000 RPM. If it hits any of these blades, which it will because of the nature of a jet engine, it can bend it, it can crack it. If at any case you lose one of those blades, that will have a tendency to take everything aft of it out. The first thing the mechanics see is a bunch of sparks coming back out the aft end of the engine, and then we've lost an engine, and there's another $1 million. So it's very important for us to check and make sure we do have everything secure. Something of passing point is we're here with the RF-4C, and most people are familiar with the F-4. Now the F-4 right in this panel here has its forward spiral well. That's where the one of the air intercept missiles is kept, one of the radar missiles. and it sits in a conformal housing that actually fits up in here. In the RF-4C, these are fiberglass panels that cover where we used to have the SLAR antennas, the side-looking radar. And it was a modification done with several different models of the SLAR, which we used quite a bit in Europe, pretty much during the height of the Cold War. Did a lot of border work with the SLAR system, and quite successful.
Okay.
Okay, one passing point here, and this is an add-on, and you will see it on all modern fighters. It is a formation strip. It's a translucent dielectric panel which we illuminate at night, and it makes our wingman, when we're at night in the weather, this helps see the airplane. So he'll line up the stripes that you'll see on the wing with the fuselage, and it just makes flying formation at night just a little bit easier.
What illuminates it though?
It's electric.
It's electric, okay.
It's electric. And because of the nature of how it's constructed, one of the checklist items we check quite clearly, we don't turn it on until we're ready to take off. And one of the very first items after landing on the checklist is to ensure that this panel is off so we don't burn them out.
Okay.
Okay, let's move forward here. And these are our access panels. And the one of the points after we've started is the crew chiefs will check, and we have air flowing in here. And this is used for our equipment cooling bays, which sit in here. Kind of an interesting part in here is we have one of our cooling turbines that actually sits about right here. Actually, it sits about right here, turns at 50,000 RPM. Just the other day on one of our flights, Friday, we had one of my wingmen lost this, and I was just walked out of the hangar looking at it, and we have 50,000 RPM of metal turning around, and the whole thing came apart. Can be very catastrophic. So we need the cooling area in here. We also need this to work. It actually talks about in the our flight manual that if this thing starts to go, it's important as soon as you can recognize it, get the power off. It can, as it says, it might, the way the blow-up pattern on it can take off your left foot. Wow. So I was a good lead that day, and I told him to move his left foot. But stay with me.
Yes.
Okay, come forward. So we have here, down in here, and we're into our camera base. It's a good idea here. So we've talked about predominantly everything on the nose gear. Here are our landing and taxi lights. Here's one of our radio antennas. And here is this Rosemont probe, which is part that feeds into the air data computer. So we do get good sensing on airspeed and altitude in the air. Down here looking, we have one of our 3 forward camera base. This is the high station, or referred to as station number 3. This is the low pan, or station number 2. And forward, we have a combination here of station number 1, and we can put the camera looking forward out for an oblique shot, or vertical looking straight down. And we have very quick access into this panel because when this airplane was designed for reconnaissance, it was designed to hit the ground, have the sensors people out here, have the film downloaded, processed, and on the PI table, having the intel pulled off of it within 30 minutes of landing. Wow. So we have very quick access into these panels. Okay, let's come back up here just a bit. We also have a capability that we don't use very much anymore because of the type camera here, but we can put in side-looking cameras that will look out these 2 side panels. So we want to check to make sure that this is secure and these quick access panels are secure. We run up forward here, and we have the dimples here. These are part of our radar warning receiver system. These are actually highly sophisticated antennas, and anytime someone's out there looking at us with a radar, it will be picked up here, transmitted to the cockpit, and we will get a good idea, radar-wise, who's looking at us.
Okay. So that's, I mean, if someone were doing a missile or something like that, that's what they would be doing?
That's actually exactly what we're talking about, Jim, is we look at all the enemy radars. As a matter of fact, we're looking at our own because we can't always trust the Army to worry about who's up there. Sometimes their feeling is, let's shoot now, we'll sort them out later.
Can you tell me what the feeling is truly when you see your indicator go off that somebody's looking you over? What do you pucker a little bit? Does your...
Well, let's just say that the heart starts going a little faster and your backseater starts speaking a little higher, and somehow your eyesight gets a lot better.
Wow. Wow.
But quite a feeling the first couple times they lock onto you, and they've done quite a bit of experimentation on how pilots actually physically react when that hurt. And they do notice that they can measure that there is a measurable increase in your blood pressure and your heart rate when the wrong type signals start coming up on this stuff.
Rick, I just got to ask you, this is a personal thing, and how long have you been flying F-4s?
22 years.
22 years.
22 years.
You ever had a missile fired at you?
Not directly at me. But I've been up there and had, or at least let's just say none that I'm aware of, which I think is a very good technique. Anything I'm unaware of is good. No, we did a lot where we do get them to lock on, and there are techniques that they use where they can come up and look at you and give you the electronic indications that they're firing at you, but maybe they are, maybe they're not. This system really evolved for the RF-4 in the Vietnam War and was very, very instrumental in increasing the survival rate. Once we were able to detect, predominantly in Vietnam, the Fansong radar connected with the SA-2 system, which is still used in a lot of countries today. So it's just, they've upgraded the system, upgraded the computers, but it really came into its heyday as an important part of aerial combat back in the Vietnam War. And it was the first time we actually got into the electronic aspect of fighting. Let's migrate forward here, and we come up to the pitot tube. One of the things to caution on the pitot tube, this is heated, and we have a switch in the cockpit, and most people that have been around a Phantom long enough, or most other airplanes, have noticed that it does get quite hot. You might notice the discoloration. The reason we heat this is anytime we're flying high or in the weather, ice will tend to form on the pitot tube. It's very important to keep this heated. That will keep the ice formation off of it. Now, we'll come forward, and we talked about the pitot tube. The pitot aspect of the tube is that which is going straight in. One of the things we'll glance at, particularly if an airplane's been sitting on the ground, see if we've picked up any bugs. Any obstructions in the pitot tube can give you false instrumentation sensing in the cockpit and can lead to some erroneous decisions. If you look around the side here, you'll see these little holes. These are some of our static holes, as we talked about the pitot and the static system. So we have a combination system right here. Okay, let's move back around. Now, as we start down this side, a lot of things we see are going to be very similar to what we just saw on the port side of the aircraft. We start out here, we have our locking pin, we have our raw antenna. Now, one thing that's different here, and the F-4 was really one part of the Navy that came into the heyday with the use of the angle of attack system. And this is this probe here, and on this airplane, it's a series of slots right here, and this will align itself with what is known as the relative wind. Relative wind versus the angle of the airplane will give us the angle of attack of the airplane. We have a sensing device here. It feeds into the cockpit, where I will show you later, where we have the instruments that will actually read what we're sensing here. In addition to that, we will get a tone in our headset. The advantage of that is angle of attack is very important to prevent stall in the aircraft. If we can feed this into our headset with a series of tones, we're able to engage the air-to-air environment with our heads out, fully looking for the enemy, and have that transmitted into our headset without ever having to refer back to the cockpit. Very big advance. The other thing is coming aboard the carrier, why the Navy is instrumental. Very, very important to have this for nailing the carrier landings. It just turns out that when they adapted it, and we took it in the Air Force, we found out that, and any old Phantom pilot or anyone that's actually flown the F-4 for a while, they would easily trade you their airspeed indicator for their angle of attack. Very important to the way we fly and land the airplane. Now, we're back to the mainstay of the F-4, which really brought this airplane into existence, and it's the J79 motor. Built by General Electric, puts out a little over 17,000 pounds of thrust, having two of them. And as most people, particularly in the early days of the Phantom, they will tell you that McDonnell Douglas, if you could get a barn, you can give them a barn door and they can put enough power on it to make it fly. Well, we thought that was the theory behind the aerodynamics on the F-4. These were the biggest motors, the most thrust put out at the time, and the F-4 entered the inventory as the muscle airplane of the time, and that's what gets it through the air. Okay. Uses a lot of gas doing it. Part of it, which makes the F-4 such a versatile airplane, we've shown the angle of attack, and we've shown some of the things for bringing it aboard the carrier. But this was designed not only to fly slow and come aboard the carrier at a slow speed where it could see, it was also designed to be out in the Mach 2 plus range. To get an airplane going Mach 2, and this is a lot more complex than you or I would care to figure out, because all those genius engineers working in those dark closets come up with these kind of systems. Well, this is our intake ramp. And you need to have a variable intake ramp to have a true supersonic airplane. You can get most airplanes, if they're designed right, through the lower ends of up to about Mach 1.5 without a variable intake. To get an airplane up much above Mach 1.5, you need to design in some sort of variable intake system. On the, everyone's familiar, or most will be, on the spike on the SR-71, the MiG-21. Both those spikes move, and as the spike moves, that allows increased engine performance. On the F-4, it happens to be the ramp here, and as we get going faster above Mach 1.5, this ramp will actually open like this, and it looks like it's restricting airflow into the motor, which it is. The other thing it's doing is it's controlling the shock wave entering the intake.
Wow.
Of course, then with these giant motors here, the thing it likes best out of that is fuel consumption. And it's using fuel faster than you can believe.
How thirsty is it?
Actually, the low-level, full afterburner fuel flow in the airplane is just under 1 ton, 2,000 pounds of gas a minute.
Whoa.
If you can imagine a 55-gallon drum, you take the lid off, turn the drum over, it won't pour out of the drum fast enough to feed these two motors.
You're kidding me. So you carry that much fuel on board when you launch?
We'll launch out here in a normal mission with about 2,500 gallons. And one of the flights I flew the other day where I launched out without any of the external fuel tanks, I had a little over 2,000 gallons of gasoline. And in the design profile that we worked, is that we were basically at landing fuel weight 14.5 minutes after takeoff.
That's extraordinary.
So you might not want to have it for home for running around the neighborhood on Sundays. The Europeans do quite a good job of celebrating their famous aircraft, and I was fortunate enough to be at a dining-in. Well, Willy Messerschmitt of the famous German Messerschmitt family was there, and he made a statement in his speech, is that he felt that the Phantom would go down in history as the all-time greatest fighter that has ever been built.
Wow.
And for those of you that have flown the Phantom, he added, but let me tell you, it's because it's dominated more arenas of aerial combat for a longer period of time than any other fighter in the history of fighter aircraft. But then he added, but it didn't do any of them well. It just did them all. That was one last comment that he had to put in to make sure the Phantom guys didn't get a little swelled heads. So let's go back in. We're looking in the intake here. This is one of our pressure sensing probes. And it's important when you get into complex engines here, you sense the intake pressure. It's very important to make sure that that is clear. And kind of a digress into something is that happened to be instrumental. This probe right here, instrumental in the Palm 90 accident near Florida in Washington, D.C. That probe was iced up, which allowed false engine sensing to that 737. So the pilots were not getting adequate information in the cockpit. So we do need to check that. We're a little fortunate out here in Reno. Snow's not one of our significant problems today.
Sure.
Look back in the intake. You'll notice what we call the bullet nose. That's where the generator is kept. Then we're looking at the stators, and we can't see a lot, but I did have the mechanic go out earlier, and he'll actually crawl down the intake, look over the engine, and make sure that there's nothing in there. I take his word for it, then I give one good check just to make sure that he knows I'm concerned about the status of this airplane.
You rely a lot on your ground crew.
We rely exclusively on the ground crew, and there is no better ground crew than we have than the mechanics we have here in the Nevada Air Guard. I flew active duty for a little over 7 years in the Phantom. I had a great time. I really enjoyed everyone. But when I got out here to the Nevada Air Guard 13, 14 years ago, I found the world's best mechanics. When they have us, and as I run across a few of the mechanics I've known for the last 15 years, they let me borrow the airplane every now and then. And they'll talk to me about what I might see when I borrow it. But they want to make sure I know it's their airplane and that I'm bringing it back to them. And it's real funny. Here, kind of different between the Guard versus the active duty. Our mechanics have been out here for years and years. Some of the mechanics on these airplanes were here the day these airplanes arrived 20 years ago. They treat that airplane just like a member of the family. When I'll talk to Jimmy or Cherry or Randy, I'll sit here and say, you know, how's 19 going for Bud? You know, how's 870 going? They'll say, well, remember a year and a half ago when I had that generator problem? And they'll relate back in terms like that. It means a lot to me that these guys treat these airplanes that way. So I want to show the same amount of respect the way I fly the airplane. But then on the lighter side, they want me out there breaking them every now and then for a little job security. And somehow they think I do that better than some of the others. So we kind of have a love-hate relationship. But these are the best mechanics we'll ever find around. I took an airplane, flew it for 3 weeks, never had a write-up. And anyone that's flown Phantoms in the last 30 years will sit there and probably think I'm lying about that. But they've done such a good job of putting these things together and watching every little move they make that I can go take an airplane out, fly it 3 weeks hard, flying it every single day, twice a day, and still comes back code 1 just like it should. Interesting point here, we're getting rid of the airplanes next week. We went out and did the 8 world speed records. On every one of those flights, that aircraft came back code 1, which is our word to the mechanics, meaning everything is 100%.
Wow.
So, quite a tribute to the airplane and to the men that maintain it. What we have here is, this is a Lao 17, and it's one of the pylons we use to attach some of the external equipment we carry on the airplane. Predominantly here in the reconnaissance role, we put one of our ECM pods on it. Those are came out in the Vietnam War, and what they do is they actually act to spoof the enemy radar that we pick up there. That's a little guts ball with the ECM pod, because the electrons in there are telling you they're working, but you just kind of got to trust them to doing what they think's right. Sometimes that takes a little more trust than we're willing to handle. But that attaches here. We're also able on the Lao 17 pylon to put some missile launchers, and we carry the AIM-9 Sidewinder missile. And the latest model we have adapted for our airplane is the AIM-9 Mike, and we can put 2 on each pylon. Normally, the way we would run in our normal configuration, we'll have 2 AIM-9s on the right starboard pylon, and we'll have an ECM pod on the left pylon. Given most of the pilots in us, I think we'd settle for the 4 AIM-9s, and we'll let someone else worry about the electrons. But quite a credit to this, an adaptation to the original R4 that came from the old recce days of alone, unarmed, and unafraid. We said, well, we can go with alone, and we can go with unafraid. But we kind of settled up, well, give us a few things. Didn't want to be completely unarmed. Okay, part of what we have here, and will be noticed to some of you, particularly anyone that's worked around the F4, mechanics are talking about it all the time. And they're calling, this is the Phantom, but where the Phantom will get you is it gives you Phantom bites. Phantom bites are a lot of these points here that after you get used to the airplane, you can kind of move your body around in such a manner that misses it. Early on in my flying career, and most of the mechanics, you'll come around these corners that'll hit you in the side of the head or poke you in the back, and you'll get a bunch of Phantom bites. Hopefully through experience they go down.
When you take off, what is your speed before you rotate?
Normally the technique, and it's kind of unique to the F4, we use what's called a full aft stick takeoff, and as soon as we start the takeoff roll, kind of simplicity, we put the stick all the way in our lap, the stab is all the way down. When the airplane gets to about 155 knots or about 175 miles an hour, the nose will start rising. When the nose gets up to about 10 or 12 degrees, we move forward on the stick, hold the nose at 10 or 12 degrees, and about 190, 195 knots, about 220 miles an hour, the airplane will break ground. Okay, let's go underneath here. And the next item forward is, this is our speed brake. We have 2, 1 on each side, hydraulically actuated, comes down, and we'll open in flight. Very simple system, disrupts the airflow, starts slowing the airplane down. Most of you have been out looking around your local airport. You'll see the tail of an airplane, and it'll have an elevator at the back of it. If you'll notice, any modern day fighter and that, we have what's called a stabilizer. And it's a flying tail plane, and the entire surface moves on it.
That whole thing?
The whole thing, and it pivots just up below that hinge right there. And that's actually a wash plate. We make sure that that sits in there tight and is actually on the pivot. And we'll see it in a little closer underneath. But by having the entire tailplane fly, we were able to increase our supersonic performance of the airplane.
So it's like trimming it up even further then.
Yes. And so when we move the stick in the airplane, what we were moving is the entire tail surface of the airplane. Now what I always do, and I always think it's very important, is I'll step back from the airplane. I'll walk out in front, usually one last word with the crew chief prior to starting. And I always like to give the airplane a look-see. You know, we've been walking around very close, very tight, kind of walking around in that forest, and we're in amongst all the trees. I always like to step back, take one last look at the airplane. Does anything look unusual on it? And there's a lot of things that you might pick up here that you just might not pick up when you're in and amongst it. Things like puddles underneath might indicate a leak, or anything that might stand out. All of our downlocks we talked about have big red tags on them, say remove before flight. We should see those hanging. We might have just pushed it aside when we've been underneath, or someone might have walked up and said, did you check this? So, good idea, and I always like to do it.
The Nevada Air National Guard had twice successfully outgunned all the other photo recon units in NATO. The drivers were Brad Wilkerson, Lee Beal, Larry Matlock, and the prime mud mover, Rick Vandam. So in the final days of the RF-4C program, Rick and a few of these drivers took it on as a challenge to set a few more class records before the Phantom slipped off into the pages of history. They gathered in the ready room to plan their record-setting strategy.
Okay, ops notes. Avoid moon dance, private airfield on VR 1250 run, route center line between H and I. Nobody's flying out there today, so that's not a player. Anybody going down to 1250? You guys gonna go down? 1,500 feet, coasting in, okay? Another noise complaint. Okay, EP of the day, September 12th. Emergency evacuation, Matt.
Lower guard up.
Place to meet off the front of the airplane, whether you're gonna ground egress or unstrap, whatever it's gonna be. Okay, go set a world record, boys. Good luck. See you out there. I'll be on all the radios.
The maintenance shop got out the military stencil kit and set about to rename one of their ships, Sage Burner 2, after the record-setting McDonnell Douglas prototype codenamed Sage Burner. In the ready room, the pilots checked their final coordinates. Like anything else that works right the first time, the men and women of the Guard had invested a great deal of time and planning to hopefully set the new records. While McDonnell Douglas had set blistering speed records, they were logged as company records, but were never officially clocked or sanctioned by an organizing body. To set the speed record, the crew had stripped off the pylons from under the wing to smooth out the airflow and reduce drag.
Here to collect my rent check.
Did I get your red check?
Collect my rent check.
The logbook, it held a special certification ticket for the missing pylons. This was a flight configuration not normally allowed in the military. Could they set the records in an airframe that was over 20 years old? Well, some of the same Hotel Sierra pilots that helped win the Recon Awards were at the controls. The pilots climbed to altitude to begin their runs. High over the earth, there was no perception of speed. Rick Vandam, Aaron Zeff, Steve Vonderheide, and Matt Speth set new records in both the 15 and 25 kilometer dash. Lee Beal and Larry Matlock set the 100 kilometer dash. Brad Wilkerson and Rick Vandam set the 500 kilometer record. And the 1,000 kilometer closed circuit dash record was set by Scotty Ernst, Alan Renwick, Chuck Hansen, and Mike Carricker. In all, they set 4 records in both the C-1 Juliet class and the C-1 India class, exceeding 1,200 knots airspeed. Rick Vandam had left the ground with 2,000 gallons of JP4. 14 minutes later, he was back with a nearly empty tank. It was a relatively good-sized crowd of family, friends, and well-wishers who had gathered to welcome back the victorious. They took the timing and documentation equipment out of the nose to verify their runs. The pilots were jubilant.
I've never seen an F-4 go by us so fast. We're doing 1.3 and here he comes. We finished the thing in like...
This was the last flight for some of these pilots. All hands received a ceremonial washdown with a 3-inch fire hose. Not every pilot thought this impromptu bath was such a swell idea.
Does that feel good or not?
Oh, it's great. Now I want to go to Disneyland. No, super.
How was flying? How was it flying this last week?
Outstanding. It was outstanding. It was great. A lot of coordination with everyone, but a lot of support from maintenance to try to get this thing done.
What's it like flying? What's it like to fly? Like a $20 carnival ride, I guess, is how you could explain it. You could imagine the finest ride and the finest simulator.
I've been flying.
Can't compare it to anything, really.
1,040 knots, which comes out to be about 1,250 miles an hour.
Wow.
So it's moving.
Hey, I thought your last flight was on Saturday.
No, I got hit up getting squirted just like these guys.
So you get it twice, huh?
Yeah, so I get it twice.
When you're up there on a day like today and you're doing a record like that, how does it compare to the way that you normally fly? I mean, the feeling you get.
I feel like I was an airline pilot. I realize that's not the career to take.
Not going into that.
It's not necessarily how we ordinarily fly. We ordinarily fly
a lot lower altitudes than we did today. We flew up in the 40 to 50,000 foot block, which we ordinarily don't do. And we flew a lot faster in the Mach 1.0 range plus that we ordinarily don't fly to. Primarily due to fuel considerations. The airplane's built to fly up there, but it takes so much fuel that it's very limited in most of the areas where we fly, mostly below 30,000 feet.
If all the phantoms in all the world could talk, imagine the stories these double uglies could tell. How many young Americans had spent hours staring at these very controls over the ocean, jungles of Southeast Asia, going downtown in Hanoi or Baghdad, or even on patrol in Europe against the threat of communism. During the Cold War, the F-4 was armed in Europe with nuclear weapons. There just wasn't a whole heck of a lot this aircraft had not done in its 30-plus year lifespan. The British paid their final respects. A visiting squadron from the Royal Air Force parked their Jags on the tarmac. This wing commander no doubt had seen his share of action. Just the kind of person you'd hope would be guarding our freedom.
The baby's just getting a little old for this. How long have you been doing it, sir? Nearly 30 years. Beach working for a minute. How do you like flying over here in America? We've had a great time. We've got so much good scenery to see.
The British taxied their Jaguars down the taxiway. With the high roller switching from the F-4s to C-130s, this would probably be the last visit from the Brits.
Preparing to fire.
"60 miles north of Reno was a military base called Sierra Army Depot. This facility ran what was the largest D-mill operation in the country. This is where they destroyed outdated munitions, such as bombs, bullets, and anti-personnel devices.
Clear the area right now.
Once part of the nuclear arsenal, these huge rocket motors were brought here to be destroyed as part of this country's disarmament pact with the former Soviet Union. Skilled demolition personnel prepared these rocket motors for destruction, lining them with plastique explosive so they would crack open and burn.
Fire in the hole!
Sierra was situated on the shores of Honey Lake, and high above Honey Lake in the California Sierra was Black Mountain. This was a favorite practice ground for the F-4s, so we sent up a crew with a couple of cameras to watch them fly around a mountaintop radar installation. Already, over half of the squadron planes had been turned out to pasture, flown off to the boneyard in Arizona for storage and decommissioning. We picked up on pilot Wayne Jeffries early one morning. This was to be his last flight in an F-4. The locker room with all the helmets hung in a row. It looked like Darth Vader's closet. Jeffries got on his speed jeans, the inflatable flight suit that kept the flight crew from passing out from lack of blood flow to the brain during high G-load turns.
Last flight, Doc. Last flight. See you later, buddy. See ya.
Like so many who work in the National Guard, Wayne Jeffries had a regular job as a Reno policeman. Weapons system officer for this flight was Jim Bradshaw. He was a local attorney.
We're done flying this. We park it back down next to ball 6 because it's their last flight.
They're going to hose them both down.
It's completely at the opposite end of the
have him
ramp.
bring ball 6 up here.
There's
We
a
can do
thought.
that. Go ahead. Bring ball 6 up here. I'll tell him bring ball 6 up here. We need to clear that end of the ramp anyway.
Big deal.
Yeah, I'll take care of that.
So that'd be all right?
Yeah.
Bring them down here at the very end?
Yeah,
Okay, great.
so they can just hose them both.
And you want to show me how to work these cameras?
They checked the logbooks and then spoke with Skyfire unit manager Pat Maxfield about how to operate the portable cameras in the cockpit.
Yeah, I'll show you how to do it. It's just one button. You just reach over there and push it, and it stops, push it, and it starts. Okay. And there's a red light that glows and tells you when it's going.
Okay.
So, that's real easy, and all the other pilots haven't had any problem with it. I'll show you how easy that is to make it happen.
Okay.
And you can control that 30 minutes, so you don't have to waste it if he's not here. Or
Well, we can use the one in the back cockpit then for the low level for you, or maybe by Mount Shasta or something when we're flying out that way.
Yeah, anything.
As the APU began to circulate hot compressed air through the starting turbine, Wayne Jeffries pre-flighted the aircraft. His last act was to fasten the straps on his G-suit before climbing into the cockpit. As he prepared to depart, Wayne spoke with our cameraman.
What we're doing is getting everything synced prior to engine start. Altimeter set, 4,400 feet, which is Reno's altitude. All this ensures is that he has the back seat of the news control panel. Everything's working properly. I got it set to true ground track, and our ground speed will show us how fast we're flying our low level.
From Reno, the aircraft traveled north out over Pyramid Lake. They would fly up along California State Route 44 north of Susanville toward Mount Shasta. There they would circle about a granite promontory known as Castle Craigs and then out to the Pacific Ocean. As the Phantoms flew through the desert canyons, their shadows chased along the ever-changing terrain. The two aircraft flew across the landscape of Northern California, hedge-hopping over ridgetops and down through small valleys. Out the side window, snow-capped Mount Shasta was just coming into view. This was the southernmost volcano that was considered part of the California-Oregon Siskiyou Mountain Range. The two planes turned slightly south and began to bank around Castle Craigs, the legendary lair of Bigfoot, a creature the Northwest Indian tribes knew as Sasquatch. Bigfoot was thought to be half human, half ape or bear. He was reportedly covered with long black fur and stood several feet taller than a normal man. Oh, we sure looked hard, but we never saw Bigfoot. The two aircraft continued on toward the Pacific Ocean. Off our wing, we could see an immense fog bank far below. We were at high altitude, flying above the tropopause. Even in late summer, the outside temperature was a bone-chilling minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. We dropped down out of the clouds, through the fog, and then down along the shoreline. The F-4s had a 1,000-mile range, and we were rapidly nearing the halfway point of our flight. Time to turn around and head back for the barn. We left the Pacific Ocean and headed back inland. The coastal hills and secluded valleys raced by our window. Now, that button that the pilot was constantly pressing on top of the stick, that's the trim tab. This adjusted the control surfaces so that aerodynamically, the aircraft was clean with minimal drag. Nearing back to Reno, we crossed north of Honey Lake and Black Mountain. North of Reno, the two planes swung back in over Pyramid Lake to make their approach. The two F-4s overflew the field in a standard military approach to landing. It had been a perfect mission, the last for Wayne Jeffries. Oh, they were wet, but happy.
Feels so good. Feels better now.
I'm gonna miss all of it. I mean, there's not one thing that I'm missing any more than anything else. Everything combined is the RF4 Phantom driver's job, and everything combined is what I do. I'm just gonna miss every bit of it.
Daddy, can you come up?
You got a good crew, and you got a
Good crew, excellent people to fly with. Everybody here, we're best friends. There's nobody beats us. It's a wonderful job, and if all that sounds arrogant, I guess it's because it is. I don't know what else to tell you.
And so, for the last time, pilot Wayne Jeffries shared the greatness of our generation with the next generation. The legacy of the F-4 was coming to a close. In the early days, the Guard had flown P-51s after World War II, and before the Phantom, they had flown F-101s. In passing tribute, they flew out to Pyramid Lake with two F-4s and escort with Ted Contry's P-51 in the original Nevada Air National Guard paint scheme. When the passes were done, these two F-4s were flown off to Idaho in preparation for transfer to the Spanish Air Force. The next morning, the remaining F-4s prepared to depart for a rendezvous with a tanker. The aircraft departed to the south. We would pass Slide Mountain and cross over Lake Tahoe. We had mounted this camera looking out the starboard side of Wing Commander Chuck Chinook's aircraft. We had also mounted this camera in the cockpit with Maintenance Commander Scotty Ernst. We watched as a giant KC-130 tanker departed behind the F-4s. We had arranged to have one of our cameras on board. The F-4s lifted off and then climbed out over Washoe Valley past Slide Mountain. This mountain had a tremendous escarpment that once had been created by a massive earthquake. Inside the KC-130, the pilots followed the formation of F-4s out over Lake Tahoe. Down below was Marlette Lake, an isolated body of water in the Carson Range, high over Lake Tahoe. It was a crystal clear fall day for flying. Lake Tahoe was the second largest alpine lake in the world, second only to Lake Baikal in Russia. One after another, the F-4s would pull into position in trail behind the tanker, waiting their turn to refuel. A long fueling boom extended out from the tail of the KC-130. In the rear of the ship was a fueling station where the operator controlled the extension, insertion, and pumping of the fuel into the aircraft. Now, as each ship pulled in to refuel, the other F-4s flew in formation off the wing of the tanker. Scotty Ernst maneuvered his aircraft into position just under the boom. Slowly, he would advance his aircraft as the fueling boom swung overhead. It required the coordination of the tanker pilot, boom operator, and the driver in the F-4. There, the boom was inserted. In just a few minutes, more than 2,000 gallons of JP4 would pass out of the tanker, down the boom, and into the fuel cells. Now it was up to the pilot to track smooth with the tanker until the tank was full. It was quite an aerial display that took place high over the Sierra. Scotty, almost full, time to break away. We watched out the viewing port as Scotty put the nose down and the boom separated. The F-4s were refueled. These aircraft were the last of the F-4s. They would soon appear for the last time in formation for opening ceremonies at the National Championship Reno Air Races. And so it was a Thursday afternoon at the air races, and we had less than 3 days to complete our filming. It was there that I happened to meet up with Rick Vandam and Steve Korchek. They asked how the filming was going, and I told them we had some great aerials, but as far as ground-to-air shots on a scale of 1 to 10, we were about at a 4. Nothing to write home to Mother about. Rick rolled his eyes and with a broad grin said, "I can take care of that." One thing led to another, and before you knew it, we were drawing pictures and making plans on the hood of my '42 military Jeep. It sounded something like this.
If I get gas,
Yep.
if I get gas, we're going to be fat on fuel. If we're fat on fuel, when we do this, you will see one of two things. You will either see 4 airplanes southbound. If you see 1 and 2, when you turn around, if 1 and 2 are turning back,
Yeah.
you're getting more.
Don't worry, we roll
Yeah.
until we roll.
But so-
I mean, we roll until we can't hear sound anymore.
Would you want a supersonic crack
Yeah.
for the camera?
Yeah, for this
For
camera
number one.
Yeah,
There we go.
you bet.
Gotta have that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, this. Yeah, he'll know we haven't left if he hears the supersonic crack.
Times 4.
We all know some of the best plans ever made are drawn on the back of a napkin and some greasy spoon. This was no different. Using topo maps, we isolated 4 mountaintops that encircled the Black Rock Desert. The plan was to get the last 4 parade phantoms out to their traditional practice area and run them at the cameras for the pilot's last flight. And the last thing we discussed was who should get all the flying credits and take the fall for this video.
Just remember, if anything goes on the tape, you can make nice hands, Rod. Boy, Chuck does a great job.
Jesus, Steph, I didn't know you could fly like that.
Those comments will be well appreciated.
Okay.
We pulled out our 4 best operators at 4 the next morning, and we headed out to the Black Rock Desert. While we packed our cameras up to the mountain peaks, back on the ramp, Crew Chief Robert Cluck and his crew were getting ready to launch their ships.
I feel it coming. Oh, it's slowly breaking through. I feel it coming. Oh, just what am I to do? I got this pounding in my brain that's slowly driving me insane. Oh, it's coming. I can feel it. Oh, yeah.
first flew in the 27th of May back in 1958. Was produced all the way until
Usually, the planes would return to the field, but on this day, next stop was Black Rock Desert. To help the pilots locate our positions, we had placed out white sheets in front of the cameras. The two-way radio crackled to life. Rick Vandam and the F-4s were on station.
Right now, you're almost even with me. Right mark. Now, you're even with me.
Okay, I got one of them. About a mile back and closing. Tally. And I got the second one about 2 miles behind them. Tally 2.
They came in high and circled the alkali flat, looking to identify our camera positions on the hilltops.
Now to your left, down on the alkali flat, there's a fence that runs, and right where it hits the sagebrush, there's a camera unit right on the edge there. You should have some red things out, over.
We were about to witness an aerial demonstration few people would ever see. Sand Pass was an area specifically set aside for the Air Guard to practice low-altitude maneuvers over the desert. There wasn't a dwelling in 50 miles. Good thing, too. Even though this was their designated practice range and the pilots were on their last flight, what you're about to see triggered an Air Force investigation into our filming of Phantom. The F-4s came downhill and flew out over the valley. You could see the vortices coming off the leading edge of their wings. The Phantoms were moving so much air at low altitude, the concussive force of the shockwave exploded into clouds of swirling alkali. Nice hands, Rod. Way to fly, Chuck. They came out of the loop, hugging the far canyons. Rick Vandam was in the lead. Steve Korchek was on his wing. This was a cameraman's dream. They chased through the pass and out toward the Black Rock Desert, following the track of the Union Pacific Railroad. Then came Bob Gardner in the lead with Chuck Hansen on his wing. There were F-4s all over the sky. They had had the ships in the air for almost 45 minutes. they could only make another 2 passes before returning to base. And just when we were about to say goodbye, as luck would have it, that old Texaco aerial fueling station just happened to be in the area. Why, just imagine our good fortune. What luck, what timing. As Sand Pass grew silent, a long old westbound UP freight consist came around the bend. No doubt the engineer and fireman had enjoyed Act 1, but they best be moving down the line, 'cause it wouldn't be long till the intermission was over and we started Act 2. The 2 lead aircraft chased along the shoreline of Pyramid Lake, up over the ridge and back down into Sand Pass. I got Rick Vandam on the radio and told him everything was looking great, but I asked if he might come just a little bit closer on the next pass. Watch this. Whoa, Rod, what hands! Chuck, what a great performance! The radio crackled to life, and the voice said, "Was that close enough, Mitchell?" I wanted to answer, but I was too busy pulling up my pants. Then down the fence line came a haircut and a shave.
Sail an ocean or make a commotion. Yeah. Some want to get to the top, some others do not. Some people's life rolls easy, others work like crazy. Some want to socialize, others exercise.
scenes you're watching should not be attempted in your Cessna, a Piper, or anything else that doesn't have two big ugly blowers. Through the pinnacles north of Pyramid Lake, pilot Jeff Turney had joined in the furball. Rick and Steve pulled the RF-4Cs up high over the desert. I called all cameras and the sound man to hold on tight.
Okay, gentlemen, this is where the sound is going to break the sonic boom, so hang on.
Incoming, be ready, guys.
Watch again as the white shock wave traveled across the ground. And now you know why they call this place Sand Pass. On the east side of the valley, we watched as a pair of F-4s sliced through the sun dapples. The jet fighter that came to life in the 1950s played out its final song over the Black Rock Desert of Nevada. The Phantom had been none too affectionately called the Rhino and the Double Ugly. But for all those young men who were once pinned down under hostile enemy fire in the jungles of Southeast Asia, there was no sweeter sound on earth than the howl of the Phantom. Like the washboard, the spittoon, the steam locomotive, and the typewriter, it was time to say goodbye to another one of America's finest achievements. For Skyfire, America's video storyteller, I'm Jim Mitchell. Thank you for watching.